The schools may be gone, but the legends live forever. Welcome to the Final Jumpshot podcast. Here's your host, Marcus Carlton.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Final Jumpshot. Now, today's show is a first for the podcast. This marks the first time that our featured interview is a member of the Arkansas Activities Association Hall of Fame. Now, it seems only fitting that we use episode number 7 to spotlight a coach who won 7 state titles over the course of his coaching career. Danny Ebbs, a distinguished educator and coach, was inducted into the Arkansas Activities Association Hall of Fame in 2020. Now, his coaching career spans multiple schools, including Blytheville, Parkdale, and Stevens. Coach Ebbs made a lasting impact through his dedication to basketball. His selection to the Hall of Fame reflects his significant influence on student athletes and the broader athletic community. Here's our interview with AAA Hall of Fame member, Coach Danny Ebbs. Well, joining me now on this episode of the Final Jumpshot podcast is a longtime coach in the state of Arkansas and a member of the 2020 class of Hall of Fame, Coach Danny Ebbs. Coach, I appreciate you coming on with us.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
So we've talked with one of your former players in a previous episode, Ronald Claiborne at Parkdale, and it kind of, he mentioned to me, he's like, hey, I really think my coach would be a really good interview for you, speaking directly about you. And then I had a colleague as well that said, hey, I remember this guy from when he coached at Blytheville, but before that he coached at several small schools. He said, you ought to give him a call. And he said he would be a really good interview for you. So you've had a couple of recommendations for me, and I'm glad to finally get you on here.
Okay, it'll be my pleasure, Marcus. Looking forward to it. These kids that I've had in the past were very, very special to me. I remember all of them very, very well. A true inspiration that I've lived with for many years.
So, Coach, let's talk about Danny Ebbs before becoming coach. Tell us a little bit about your background and where you grew up, and kind of set the table for us.
Okay, I went to a small school myself. I grew up at Deshae Central. My high school basketball coach was Joe Barlow. I attended and graduated from Deshae Central. Now, that is the school where the Jones boys, Caldwell Jones and Major Jones, that's where they graduated. However, I did not play with them. The year that I graduated in 1967 from Deshae Central, they came from a school called Wolf Project, which was near McGee, and they didn't enroll in Deshae Central until the year after I graduated. So I did not have the privilege of playing with the Jones boys, but they both played, Major and Caldwell both played in the NBA. So I grew up at Deshae Central. I played basketball at UAM under Shorty Beard from 1968 through 72. I attended Arkansas A&M and graduated from UAM. They changed the name of the school my senior year there.
All right. Well, that kind of helps me a little bit with my next question, because I was going to go next with, who were some of the people that inspired you to become a coach, and what made you decide, hey, I think I want to pursue coaching?
Well, I'd always been very, very fond of athletics. I played my earlier years in school. I attended Dumas High School, where I played football and basketball and baseball. Tried to play a little bit of everything. Then when we moved out to Roar, Arkansas, to Shea Central, it's kind of like Parkdale. All they had was basketball, so I didn't get to play football anymore. I just had to concentrate on basketball. But I had a coach named Joe Barlow that was very inspirational to me, and he is basically, we talked about coaching and strategies and things all through my high school career, and even when I was in college, he never missed a game. When I was at Arkansas A&M, he traveled to Delta State and Batesville, or wherever we were, and watched me and followed me, and he was one of the big inspirational people that made me realize, hey, this is I think this is what I want to do.
That's been a recurring theme that a lot of people that I've talked to, not just for the podcast, but for coaching in general, it always goes back almost to a coach that they had somewhere along the way that kind of set the table for them to pursue their own coaching career. And it sounds like your story is no different.
Well, I think all of them are basically the same. You know, if you want to make a good living, be a lawyer or a doctor. But if you want to make a living, be a coach or a teacher.
I understand completely. So before getting to Parkdale, and that's mainly where I want to go with this. But before we get there, I want to talk about the success that you had at Stevens. You were the girls coach at Stevens. Stevens was a small school as well. It was not a Class B. If I remember correctly, it's a Class A, which was just one level above. And you went in 1977, you took the girls team, not only won state, but won the overall with the Stevens Class A girls team. Tell me a little bit about that season.
Well, that was the only year that I was at Stevens. I only stayed there 1 year because I was interested in administration and coaching boys. But when I was at Stevens, we had a multi-talented young lady named Gail Buffington, who was probably the best athlete I think probably that I've ever been associated with as far as just athleticism. Gail was so good that there were times when after practice, her and I would play two of the senior boys on the basketball team, and we could beat them. Gail could hold her own with anybody. She was a very, very talented young lady, very, very good. Ended up going to Louisiana Tech. Signed at Louisiana Tech when Louisiana Tech was the #1 team in the nation at that particular time. And I can recall the ability that Gail had. Back at that time, we had the 6-on-6 format. And Gail could only play on one half the court. She was a forward, and the guards played on the other end. And I recall one time we were playing a team. This is how talented Gail is. We were playing a team named McNeil. A real good friend of mine, Richard Britt, was coaching at McNeil. They had a young lady named Barbara Turner, nearly 6 foot, just a phenomenal player. And we knew that the only way that we could beat McNeil was to keep the ball out of her hands. Because McNeil was so big and so strong. They were really, really good. In fact, we ended up beating McNeil in the finals of the overall that year at El Dorado High School. That's where the overall was that year. But we knew that we could not beat McNeil at McNeil if we played the game that they liked to play, and that's get the ball to her because she was so dominant. So we decided with Gail, you couldn't take the ball away from her. I mean, she was so good. We decided we were going to hold the ball. The only way we could beat McNeil is keep the ball out of Barbara Turner's hands. That's the only way. So we beat them 5-4. We took the last shot of each quarter. We ended up beating McNeil 5-4 at their place, which was almost biblical.
For those who may not be aware, because I'm glad you brought up that it was the 6-on-6 style of the women's game. I was familiar with this because I've listened to my mother tell stories about playing 3 on the defensive end and 3 on the offensive end. But for those who may not be familiar with that, give us just a brief breakdown of how that worked.
Well, you had 3 guards and 3 forwards, and you could not cross the line. I mean, if you cross the line either way, it's just like an out-of-bounds line for it on the end of the court. It's a violation. The guards had to get the ball to the forward, so you had to definitely work on a good press offense. Even though it was 3-on-3, they could still trap you and force you to make quick passes and mistakes. But you had 3 guards on one end and 3 forwards on the other end, and the guard's job was to play defense and get the ball to the forwards. The forwards then had the offensive end, and then when they scored or didn't score, then they're the press of the other guard taking the ball back up to their forwards. So it was a constant press for the 6-on-6, a very, very, very strenuous game for young ladies.
And I've heard stories, from when my mother played and some other family members, and they talked about that they really enjoyed that style when they played, and that, they kind of wish, in their mind, they'd never gone away from it. But as you know, times change and people have different ideas and things like that just happen. But I want to touch just a brief moment about, you mentioned that Stevens beat McNeil in the overall. Now, if I remember correctly, McNeil was a Class B team, so you had a matchup in the finals of the overalls between a Class A and a Class B team. I mean, that right there speaks to the level of basketball that was being played at the small school level.
Yes, you're correct. They were Class B, we were Class A.
That's just an amazing run there to take the girls team at Stevens, run all the way through, win the state championship, and then move on to the overalls, run through that and beat the Class B team in the final. Just an amazing run by that team. And I'm glad you brought up Buffington, because I had some notes on her that I wanted to be sure that we got in there, and you nailed everything I wanted to hit there. I want to move forward to once you got to Parkdale. We talked with Ronald Claiborne, and when I asked him about you, he was extremely complimentary about you and the impact that you had on him and the rest of the team there at Parkdale, as well as the community. Tell us about that magical season of 1979 with the Parkdale Dragons.
Well, it's anywhere you go somewhere and you're new, the first thing you have to do is find an atom of acceptance. And the best way to do that is to be honest up front, straightforward, and to the point with people, not only with your players, but with the community. Parkdale, the story of Parkdale is truly biblical. I would be the first to say that those young men did things that I had no idea, even myself, that they could do. And I can remember when I went to Parkdale, as I've told a lot of players and a lot of people in my time, even as an administrator and a high school principal, that I was a high school principal for 25 years after I coached. And I used to tell all my players, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So you got to have an item of direction. And when I went to Parkdale, I could tell that there needed to be some changes. And I told my players, we're going to change the culture here. We've got to. I said, if we're going to be successful, we're going to have to change the culture. Now, I was not only the boys basketball coach at Parkdale. Mr. Aiken was the superintendent, and I was the high school principal. And I can remember going to PTA meetings and things, and I told the parents, I said, you go to these basketball games, and the gym would be full, but it's full of students. And I look around, where are all the parents? Where are all the adults that live in Parkdale? So we had a PTA meeting one time. I never will forget this. Randolph Morris made a statement. I never will forget, I told these parents, I said, y'all need to come watch these kids play. They work really, really hard. They're good kids. They play hard. I said, y'all need to come watch these kids play. And Randolph said, Coach, if they don't want to come, you can't stop them. So I remember that story forever, that Randolph said that you can't stop them. If they don't come, you can't stop them. But we had to, first of all, at Parkdale, we had to change the culture. We had to make sure that we were all together. Hey, let's have a dream. Let's see if we can make a dream come true. And we're only going to do that with one thing, and that's a work ethic. So those kids were so hungry for someone to really care for them. And they responded well, really, really well. They were super kids, super workers, and I can't say enough good things about that whole bunch. I mean, our tallest player was 6'6", maybe 6'1", and he's guarding people like Scott Hall and those kind of kids from Pine Bluff. It's just phenomenal, the heart that they had at Parkdale.
When I was talking to Ronald, we talked about the state championship and moving on to the overalls. And then I drew some similarities between the 77 girls Stevens team and this 79 Parkdale team, because as you're moving through the overalls and you're beating teams that are much larger than Parkdale, 2, 3, possibly even 4 times as big as Parkdale, if not more, and you're moving through and you end up playing Class A Marmaduke in the finals of the overall. You're not playing Pine Bluff, you're not playing Little Rock Central, you're playing another tiny school from the northeast corner of the state in Marmaduke. I mean, how special is it to see the level of basketball that's being played where you have not just, I mean, this is not the first time in your career that this had happened, because you had it with Stevens, a Class A versus Class B in the overall championship. Fast forward 2 years later, it's a very similar scenario. It's just you're coaching the Class B team this time instead of the Class A.
Well, what does that tell you about small schools? What does that tell you about the culture of small schools? You know, we didn't have to have a whole lot of faculty members to attend the game to have them all there, because we didn't have 9 teachers at Parkdale High School in 1979. We had 4 buses in our school. We ran 4 bus routes to get our kids to school. For just a phenomenal story about those young people and what they accomplished.
Coach, when you first get to Parkdale, you talked about changing the culture, but were you able to see, you know, maybe that at that first practice or the first time you watched the guys scrimmage, were you sitting there looking at, okay, I've got a pretty good hand that's been dealt to me here. I just need to maybe fine tune things a little bit and we could be really special?
You know, that's a very good statement, Marcus. But, you know, also one thing that we haven't mentioned here, Mr. Aiken, the superintendent, he came to me one time. Now, that year in 79, I don't know if you're aware or not, but not only did our boys win the state championship, our senior girls also won the state championship in 1979. We all agreed that we needed to change the culture. The girls were phenomenal. They had Pearline Davidson, who was an All-American. Pearline just recently passed not too long ago. She's in the Hall of Fame, UAM Hall of Fame, a super young lady. But, you know, the culture there was not necessarily changed. It was just redirected toward doing the right thing and working hard. And I remember one time, Mr. Aiken, we were in the state tournament. Both of us were in the state tournament together. And I remember him coming to me and said, Mr. Ebbs, said, we got games Friday. I wonder, would it be okay if maybe we got a little extra practice time this week, maybe a couple of days, maybe an extra period or so to spend with it? I said, well, Mr. Aiken, you're the superintendent and I'm the principal. I guess we can do what we want to. So that's what we did. But Mr. Aiken was a super guy, superintendent, and he coached girls for many, many years. And I think he also is in the Coaches Hall of Fame at this time.
I'm glad you brought that up about the girls team as well, because that was one note that I had out to the side that it was just kind of a little nugget of information that I wanted to throw in as an, oh, by the way, you know, the success didn't stop with the boys team. It was also with the girls. But that, you know, to me, just looking at that as an outsider looking in, the way that you were accepted into the community there with the idea that you had of coming in and saying, okay, we got to, you know, we need to change things just a little bit. I mean, that I don't think people fully grasp sometime that when you come in as, I don't want to say an outsider, but I don't know what other word to use. But if you come into a community that is new to you and you're coming in and you're telling people, hey, we need to change a few things, that's not always met with acceptance.
That's correct. That's correct. You know, it's an item of caring about each other and caring for people. I remember after we won the overall, I was interviewed by a guy named Will Rogers, who was a reporter for the Arkansas Democrat. And he came to me and he asked me, he said, just point blank, he said, Coach, don't be offended by this, but he said, I want to ask you, how in the world does a white man get all those black kids to play that hard for it? I said, William, there's 3 reasons. Number 1, I love them. Number 2, they know it. And number 3, they don't know I'm white. So that pretty well says it all for the relationships that we had with those kids, not only there at Parkdale and Stevens and Blytheville. That's the culture that I wanted accepted throughout all of our programs and through our school systems.
Well, and that's one thing that looking through the research, that's one of the very first questions that came to my mind as well, because as Mr. Rogers pointed out, that's not always a situation that works out as amazingly as yours did, not only in Parkdale, but then, later on you go on to Blytheville, have extreme success in Blytheville, including not just winning state titles, but you won another overall title in Blytheville later on in 1989. Looking at those two teams between 1979 Parkdale and 1989 Blytheville, were there any similarities between those two teams in your mind from what you saw, or were they each kind of their own world?
Marcus, the only similarity that they had was work ethic. That's the only similarities that they had. Parkdale was a tremendous scoring team, tremendous speed, tremendous shooter. I cannot imagine how good Ronald Claiborne and Randolph Morris and Lord Collins, I cannot imagine how good they would have been had we had the three-point shot at that time. Because when Morris and Claiborne crossed half court, they had the green light. They were phenomenal shooters. And I cannot imagine how much better we would have been had we had the three-point shot. But Parkdale was a tremendously offensive team. But when I went to Blytheville, the difference between Parkdale and Blytheville, Parkdale was extremely talented, quick, extremely talented, smart, very, very smart. The difference between them and the similarities, Blytheville, when I went to Blytheville, we excelled with our defense and our rebounding. Blytheville, those kids were scavengers. I'm telling you, if you're ever in a street fight, you wanted to be with that bunch. They'll kick us off, because I'm telling you, they would almost give you the ball just to guard you. They took a lot of pride in their defense. They played very, very hard. Some of the practices that we had, we'd have injured players ask, we're going to work on taking the charge. We're going to get after the loose ball. We're going to get on the floor. If it goes in the bleachers, we're going to go in the bleachers to get it. We're going to be street fighters. And those were super athletes, and they're tough. But I tell you, the Blytheville and Parkdale were not similar in any way, other than the fact that they worked hard, and they really didn't have a choice about that.
That's an interesting sidebar there, with you talk about how hard the Blytheville team played, and it sounds like that team was one that focused on the small things that might not show up in the newspaper article or the stat sheet, taking charges, diving after loose balls, the little things that determine whether you can win or lose. But if you're not a basketball person, you may not notice those type of deals. Is that a fair statement?
That is very, very fair. Let me tell you a story about a young man at Blytheville named John. We called him Rat Musgraves. We were playing in the NEA tournament in the semifinals on a Thursday night. And John went after a loose ball, and he hit the floor with his mouth, with his head, knocked 4 teeth out. Now, this is a true story, Marcus. He knocked 4 teeth out. It's late in the game. We ended up taking him out. A young lady by the name of Donna DeChico, whose son played on my team, took his 4 teeth, wrapped them in a handkerchief, put them in her purse. And then after the game, Rat and I go to the emergency room, and they put his teeth back in his head. And we leave at 5:30. I get to Blytheville in time to teach my first 8 o'clock class. And that next night, Rat played against West Memphis in the finals. Now, this is a story that a lot of people do not believe, but this is a true story. And this just shows, and it makes me sick sometimes to watch some of these NBA and college teams. You get hit in the mouth, you want to lay down on the floor for 30 minutes, let 3 or 4 people come pick you up. You get hit in the mouth, you get back up. But Rat is a real good example of the toughness that we had there at Blytheville. And not only with Rat, but we had such kids, Fred Haynes, a tremendous defensive player, Ed Cullins, 6'1", was the MVP. And Blytheville that year guarded Eric Traylor, who was 6'9" from Malvern. Ed's only 6'1", and he was the MVP, a postman. So the work ethic says it all about those kids.
To kind of piggyback on that, Coach, you've coached it at Class A, Class B, and then I think at the time Blytheville may have been maybe Class 4A. They were one of the larger classes. Looking at your career, do you feel like that maybe the small school teams like Class A, Class B teams, do you feel like they play with a chip on their shoulder at times because they feel like they have something to prove?
Well, I don't think so. I think that everybody accepted, this is part of life. And this is what I used to tell my kids. And this is what I used to tell people when I coach the small schools or larger schools. You've got to accept who you are. Accept who you are and be happy with that. Be the very best that you can. And with that philosophy, you don't worry about who's bigger. Their attitude was you only put 5 on the floor at one time anyway. No matter how big you are, how many kids you got. For the girls, it was 6. And Gail said, they can only play 6, just like us. You put your pants on one leg at a time, just like we do. So that's the attitude, I think, a lot of times that the players accepted.
So, Coach, we've talked about your different stops along the way and the success you've had. Prior to me hitting the record button and in our previous conversation we had to kind of set this up, you talked about the fact that you still hear from players that played for you at stops just along the way. What does that say about how much these players respect you, that all these years later they're still reaching out to you, and maybe it's just to say hi or just to check in, but what does that say about the impact that maybe you were able to leave on these young men and women?
Well, it's very, very pleasing, first of all, that they accepted a philosophy that I gave them. That makes me more proud than anything. When I ask a young man to work hard and he looks me in his face and says, "Yes, sir," I know he's going to work hard. I can tell by the way he acts, the way he looks. That's one thing that you learn from experience. You learn how to read people, and a lot of times I've had players that they make a mistake. I could get on them real hard and it would help. But then on the other hand, you might have a player that you can't handle that way. You might have a player that if you get on him hard, it breaks him down and he's not going to do as well. So you have to learn your players. And I learned my players. I learned them. I learned about their families. I've gone to places to get them out of trouble. I've gone places that I've got them out of jail, for doing things. But they were still good people. They make mistakes. But yes, I'm very, very proud that I still hear from a lot of my players. I heard the other day from a young lady that I coached my very, very first year of coaching in 1972. A young lady from McRae, Arkansas, and I remember my salary that first year was $6,400 a year. I signed a contract for $6,400 a year, but I still hear from kids and players and some of their parents that through the years that I coached 45 years ago, and it's very, very pleasing that I hear from them. I talked to John Rat Musgrave just this morning. I talked to Fred Haynes just last week. I talked to Claiborne. I saw Randolph not too long ago, Randolph Morris. So, yes, the relationship that we had is ongoing.
Coach, we touched on this earlier. You remember the 2020 Arkansas High School Sports Hall of Fame class. Just amazing success everywhere you went. But looking back over your coaching career, is there anything that you're looking at it now in 2025 and maybe looking back over the course of your career and you look at it and say, maybe I should have made a different choice there?
Yes, I can assure you that every high school coach dreams of being a head coach in college. I had the opportunity to be the head coach both in 2 AIC schools. I was the head coach at Arkansas Tech for 4 years and was the head coach at Henderson State for 4 years. And I left, in order to take those 2 jobs, I left real good teams. I left the Parkdale team with Claiborne and Morris and all those kids returning to go to Arkansas Tech. And then I left the Blytheville team to go to Henderson State with 4 starters back So you wonder sometimes how dumb you can be. But I think if I had it to do over, I would have stayed in the high school, because you have a closer knit with parents, relationships with communities, and those are some of the things that I missed. I do not regret coaching on the college level, but I think if I had it to do over again, I probably would have stayed in high school.
Over the course of your career in coaching in high school and college both, looking at the game from, the late 70s all the way through the 80s and comparing it to now, what's the biggest difference you see in the way not just kids, but also the way kids and coaches approach the game?
Well, I think that, back then, I think there was probably more successful young small kid players. I think the bigger schools now, of course, with consolidation, you don't have that. You don't have a lot of that closeness that you get from being successful in a small school. That was our success, like Parkdale and Stevens, those places. When they won, that was the highlight of their lives. It's very, 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 very astonishing what that meant to those people and those communities. And that's pretty well gone now with everybody being in a large school.
So to expand on that a little bit, I believe it was the early 90s when Parkdale was consolidated into Hamburg. And I'd have to look on Stevens because I don't remember the exact year that they were consolidated. But when you found out that some of these schools that you had stopped at along the way, like Stevens and like Parkdale, were going to be consolidated into larger districts, and the identity of Parkdale and Stevens both was no longer going to exist. I mean, what was your immediate feelings or emotions when you heard the news on that?
Well, when you hear that, you're very, very fond of your memories that you have and the scrapbooks that you kept through the years. So I still have a lot of things, a lot of articles and things about those kids and what they accomplished and how they were in the communities and how we grew and how we changed for the kids' sake. Those parents at Parkdale and Stevens, they made a culture change, but they did it for their kids, and that's what's important.
All right, Coach, last question here. I'll let you get out of here with this, but let's say that as we're doing this interview and someone's listening back to this on the podcast that is a young and up and coming coach. What would be the one piece of advice you would give to a young coach that's just breaking into the business?
Well, first of all, coaching and success is about rapport with athletes. If you don't have a close knit with people, not only with the players, but with their parents and with the communities, the first thing you have to do is be accepted, because if you're not accepted, you're not going to be successful. And I think that sincerity and honesty, faith, I think those things are important in order for you to lead. In order for you to be a leader, you have to concentrate on the little things, making sure that the kids do the right thing. Make sure when you go to a ball game and you go into a restaurant, you make sure that you're obedient and you're nice and you're quiet. You put your chair back under the table and you put your trash in the trash can. All those little things that you do is what determines the outcome that you will have. I really believe that.
Well, Coach, I really appreciate you taking this time to visit with me here on the podcast and being able to tell your story about your career over the course of so many years. And I have to put this in there because in our first conversation that we had on the phone when we were setting this up, you had mentioned that you were now retired after 50 years in education. And I wanted to tip my hat to you publicly on this interview to say thank you so much for your service to all these different communities that you have given over the years, because working in the education field is not for the faint of heart, and to do it for 50 years is very worthy of saying a congratulations, and it's going to be a well-deserved retirement for you, sir.
Thank you very, very much. And again, if I had it to do over, I think I would have done the very, very same thing that I've done. I'm enjoying my retirement now, but I also really enjoy hearing and seeing my players that I coached through the years and friends and patrons of those communities. I still have contact with a lot of them. So I'm just thankful that I was able to have the opportunities that I've had.
Thank you, Coach Ebbs, for giving us such an outstanding interview. Your insights clearly demonstrate why your players embraced your philosophy and approach so wholeheartedly. The fact that athletes from 50 years ago still maintain contact with you, that speaks volumes about the profound Hall of Fame worthy impact you've had on their lives. I want to send out a special thank you to Ronald Claiborne, one of the former players of Coach Ebbs, for recommending that I reach out to Coach for this interview. I also want to give another shout out to my good friend Randy Myers for his help in making this connection with Coach Ebbs. Now, most importantly, I want to say a big thank you to all of our listeners. Earlier this week, I sat down and I went through the podcast numbers, and across all the platforms, I was just astonished at what I saw. Through 6 episodes, all of you listening to this show have downloaded and listened to this series over 17,000 times and counting. Just a simple thank you. It doesn't fully express my gratitude for the support. Without all of you, this show is not possible. Now, we've got many more episodes planned for the coming weeks and months, featuring teams from around my home in northeast corner of Arkansas and beyond. We're trying to go and get more stories like Coach Ebbs and Parkdale's from all across the great state of Arkansas. If there's a team you think we should cover, or a coach, or a specific player, go to our Facebook page and leave us a comment or send us a private message through Facebook Messenger. Technology's made it easier than ever to connect, and we're committed to telling the stories of all of these small school superstars that are long gone. Join us on the Final Jump Shot to keep these stories alive. Until next time, I'm your host, Marcus Carlton, and you've been listening to the Final Jump Shot podcast.
You've been listening to the Final Jump Shot, a Cam Productions podcast. Subscribe to the Final Jump Shot to ensure you never miss an episode.